Hello everyone, this is Mitch, and welcome to yet another Kerbal Space Program capsule. In this video, I'm going to tackle various tools that are very helpful to play the game for the average person like me. A little bit of a disclaimer, I did talk about this a little bit in the very first video I posted on the Let's Play. For the real disclaimer, however, of course, if you're an aerospace specialist or an astrophysics specialist or both, using these tools might make the game a little bit boring. If you like to experiment or anything like that, if the time spent trying things out is not a source of frustration for you, then using any combination of these tools may make the game, less interesting for you. So anyways, if you do mind wasting time trying things out, although some amount of testing is probably a good idea, well, either way, these tools will help you and save you a lot of time. The first one I'm going to talk about is the one that's currently on your screen and that you always see me using, and it's Kerbal Engineer Redux. There are other tools that give you similar amounts of information, but I find Kerbal Engineer to be the most interesting or the most useful for me. There is also MechJeb, but if you refer to that disclaimer, MechJeb can essentially do a lot of things for you, which can make the game boring, at least for me, in my opinion. That's my opinion only. If you like MechJeb, by all means use it, but I don't. I prefer Kerbal Engineer. So what does Kerbal Engineer let you do? Well, there are a lot of things, but the most interesting and useful one would be delta V and thrust to weight ratios. These are very, 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 very critical pieces of information for any spacecraft or even a plane that doesn't even leave Kerbin. How it works, basically, you can give a reference body. In this case, it's Kerbin, the home planet, and you even have an altitude control here, which tells you the different values at different altitudes. So, for example, this rocket is an orbiter, as stated by its name, and to go into orbit, if you know, it takes at least 3,400 meters per second of delta V. This means that this rocket has enough in theory and in practice. I have taken this rocket into orbit before, but Kerbal Engineer tells me that I don't need to launch this rocket to know that it's able to go into orbit. So how does it work? Well, here you have S5, and this corresponds to stage 5 on my current vehicle. So you can see I have all these rockets firing. You can see at the bottom of the screen the the green overlay. And with all the fuel available to these rockets, I have the first 1,500 units of delta V that I need to go to orbit. Now, assuming that if you move the altitude slider here, because my rocket is going to be higher up when the next stage fires, and that's stage 4 here, S4, is when these decouplers take these liquid fuel boosters off of my rocket because they're empty. So this stage, because I have a fuel duct here, the center fuel tanks are still full and I still have these two engines firing. And this one individually has 2,200 meters per second of delta V at roughly 10 kilometers. So if you add these two numbers, you get the number on the right, which is 3,959 meters per second of delta V. So this should easily make orbit. Easily. And then we have the stage 3, which is when we decouple this, which is essentially the ascent stage, and fire this other engine, which you don't see, but is a LV909 Terrier engine, which you can tell has a lot less thrust to weight ratio, although up in the higher atmosphere it's actually pretty decent. And this one, we're going to go all the way up to 70 kilometers altitude. This is essentially orbit, because this vehicle should be able to make orbit without using this engine. Well, this one has alone another 2,100 units meter per second of delta V, for a grand total of 6,200 meters per second of delta V. So this is very interesting because I can tell where my rocket can go using this. Thrust to weight ratios, essentially how fast can my rocket accelerate. So at 0 altitude, 1.25. So this rocket will actually accelerate at 1.25 times the gravity. So this is very important, because if it's not above 1, then it's less than the gravity, than the local gravity. So it's not going to lift off if I have less than 1. For example, this would be interesting if we want to make a ship that can lift off from Eve. If you want to return something from Eve, then you can use Kerbal Engineer to actually calculate if your rocket will be able to lift off. And in this case, even with my initial stage, I don't even have a third of the required thrust to weight ratio to get this off the ground. So I could burn all my fuel and the rocket is not going to move because the gravity is stronger than my engines. So again, very useful information, and you have all the celestial bodies in the stock game available to you. And for all of those who have an atmosphere, you can use this slider here and see that at, well, even outside of the atmosphere of Eve, my spaceship still couldn't escape its gravity. So yeah, it can still change its orbit if it's already in orbit, but if I'm trying to achieve orbit, it's going to be very, very difficult. So that's it. That was Kerbal Engineer. There are other tools that give you delta V readings and such, like MechJeb does that too, but again, my preference is Kerbal Engineer. It can tell you a lot more information than this as well, but this is going to deserve its own video, really. So moving on, we have the Launch Window Planner by Alexmoon, which is available at this URL, which is going to be in the description, and I'm probably going to put an annotation, that's going to redirect you there. And this is to tell you when you should launch a vehicle, or at least burn at escape velocity to reach another celestial body. So, for instance, if you want to go to Duna from Kerbin, when is it going to be most efficient? When is it going to require the least amount of fuel? So it's preset like this, Kerbin and Duna destinations. It's set to Kerbin time because in the Kerbal Space Program options you can actually set it to tell you time in Earth time. So you just go plot it, and it's going to tell you that if you leave on year 1 at day 236 at 4 hours and 19 minutes, it's going to require exactly 1,692 meters per second of delta V to go from orbit on Kerbin to get an encounter and actually an orbit around Duna at, again, 100 kilometers. But you can play with this. Like, for example, if you want to depart earlier, you have the heat scale here that tells you the value in delta V. So if you don't mind spending an extra bit of fuel, for example, like 500 units, you could leave earlier. Like if I click here, you can see I could leave as early as year 1, day 114 instead. It's going to cost me more fuel, but I'm going to be departing earlier. And on the other axis, you have the flight time. This is how long you're going to spend in between planets. Basically, you're leaving Kerbin, you're in interstellar space, and you're traveling to Duna, so you're still not in Duna's sphere of influence. So that would be around flight time 329 days if I did it like that. If I want to fly faster, I can actually wait a little bit longer and use, again, more fuel, but I can only spend like half the time in space, like 153 days. This could be useful if you're trying, to refuel a station, or if you're using some kind of a life support mod. If you want to calculate how soon and how fast and how much fuel it's going to require to have your supplies reach your destination by, an acceptable time frame, then you can use it like that as well. There's also, back to the Kerbal Space Program window, a mod that lets you do the same thing from within Kerbal Space Program. So for example, going to Moho, now the options set themselves normally, but you can actually tweak them, the same as on the website. And it's going to tell me here, departure year 1, day 269 at 2 hours and almost 10 minutes. If I go from Kerbin to Moho, this is how I do it without spending, 10 times the fuel, or, So that's it. I'm going to post another link for that in the description, and at the end of the video I'm going to explain quickly how to explain mods, how to install mods. Moving on, a delta V, reading, it's not going to help you much if you don't know how much delta V you require to go places, and that's why you need a delta V map. It's updated frequently on the forums, the official forums, at this URL, and it looks like this. If we go full size, oh, that's a bit much, but basically when I told you it required 3,400 meters per second of delta V to get to orbit from Kerbin, you find that here. People calculate these things for you, and they're available on the delta V map. So for example, going from Kerbin's orbit to the moon is going to require a 860 units of delta V to get an encounter, and then another 310 units, 10 meters per second, to get into a low orbit at 14 kilometers, if you can read that. There we go, 14 kilometers around the moon. And then to land, it's going to cost you another 580 units to land, because there are no atmospheres, so there are really no other ways to slow yourself down than to use a rocket and burn fuel. And it's approximately the same to get back into orbit from the surface, so another 580 units to get back into low orbit. And then if you want to get to escape velocity, you're going to need another 310 units. And well, really, you don't necessarily need the 860 units to get back to Kerbin, because then you're going to be in elliptical orbit, and if you burn at apoapsis, you can actually get a re-entry trajectory fairly cheaply. But still, you should probably plan for extra fuel to adjust your maneuvers. But that's only if you have a delta V map. Alternatively, if for some reason the links no longer work in the future, you can look for one on Google Images using these terms. They will return all kinds of outdated maps and more recent ones. You can look for yourself. People have been kind enough to tell you what version of the game the map is for on the picture itself, if you look at the text. So that's it. And finally, since 1.2, since the COM network has been implemented, we have a signal strength calculator graciously given to us by Poodmund on the forums. So there are all kinds of instructions to use his calculator on the post on the official forums, which you will be given the link again in the annotations. And there is the actual sheet which you can copy to make your own calculations undisturbed, because as you can see, there are a lot of people working with the public copy. So since 1.2, you need signal strength to either transmit science or control probes remotely. So this is extremely useful to make sure, for example, if you send a probe to Duna and you want to make sure you're able to both transmit science and control it without a pilot, then you need signal strength. And to know if your antennas are going to be strong enough to communicate with each other and with what kind of signal strength you're going to do it, then this is the tool to use. Sadly, I don't know of any implementations in-game as a plugin or a mod, but still very useful. But you're going to have to tab out of the game, sorry. Anyways, and to install mods, finally, it's actually quite simple. You can go, if you're going from Steam, you can go to your library, right-click Kerbal Space Program, go into the Properties, Local Files, browse local files. Now, usually when you download a mod, it's either going to be zipped or compressed in some form, and if you uncompress it, it's probably going to give you either a game data folder or another folder which is to be put in your game data folder. So this is how you find it. If it gives you a game data folder, well, you can just copy it over this one, and if it doesn't, then you can just put the folder in there, and that's basically done. Otherwise, you can probably find your Kerbal Space Program folder on your computer and do the same if you're not using Steam for some reason. So that's it. If you want more information, there are very good tutorials on how to install mods out there. So if this helped you, give me a like and subscribe, and comments below. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.